Hi, welcome to the Engadget Podcast. I'm Mark Purton, Executive Editor, and I'm joined this week by Peter Rojas and Dana Wollman. We've got a lot to talk about this week in the world of tablets. I think it's pretty much a week of records in terms of the number of tablets either announced or introduced. We've got Apple's Retina iPad Mini, the iPad Air, new Surface tablets from Microsoft hitting retail, and of course Nokia's new Windows tablet, the 2520. But first, this episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial, go to squarespace.com and use offer code Engadget. So, Apple's new tablets. Any thoughts? It was pretty much. I don't know if there were any surprises from Apple's announcement, but
I think I think that there were a few things that we weren't sure of. Like I think we weren't 100% certain there was going to be a Retina iPad Mini. So the fact that they did do that is,
I don't know to what extent we were certain and to what extent we wanted it so badly, and it just seemed so logical that we kind of convinced ourselves it was coming.
yeah.
But it was still a little bit of a surprise, wasn't it?
Well, I think there was a little bit of speculation that given the constraints in supply, and certainly they were not going to be able to do a different resolution than what they were doing with the Retina
Right.
iPad. So shrinking it down was definitely a complex issue, and I think also there's some issues around them not wanting to bump up the thickness or weight significantly to accommodate the Retina display uses.
Yeah, they put a lot of pressure on their
uses
suppliers.
more power, and if so it definitely was if they had not done it, it wouldn't have been a complete shock.
Yeah, but
There
pretty
would
much
have been
had
howls
to,
of
though.
protest, though. People
Yeah.
would have been
Yeah.
pissed.
Yeah, I think they pretty much had to do it. Their customers were expecting it, the markets were expecting it, and I think their competitors were.
But were you expecting the bump in price to $399?
That's a little harsh.
It's a little harsh, yeah.
I think what it for me, when you compare it to because the $399 is that's the entry point for the 16 gig Wi-Fi version.
Yeah.
If you want something with LTE and higher storage capacity, then it starts to get pretty pricey pretty quick.
When you've got other 7-inch tablets for as little as $100 or decent ones for $150, $200,
Yeah.
you start to really think that who are they marketing this to? Who's the customer base
But it's like
for this?
I think the 32 gig iPad Mini with LTE is like $729.
Yeah.
That's more than twice the cost of the 32 gig Nexus 7 with LTE.
Yeah, no, that's pretty extreme. I think they're counting, I guess, on the loyalty of Apple early adopters who will pay that.
Then again, I'm okay with the idea of, not like I personally am in the market for a $400 plus tablet myself, but I don't mind the idea of paying about the same for a tablet that it just happens to be smaller, but where the build quality is the same, where the screen is also excellent, where you are more or less getting the same experience. Maybe the experience you want, if what you wanted was a more portable tablet or one that's easier to hold in two hands. We have this weird dichotomy with phones too, where we expect smaller phones to somehow not be as nice or as expensive. I don't see why that has to be.
No, and there's
case.
certainly a lot of demand for small tablets. I think even most of the market research has shown the sweet spot is definitely in the 7 to 8 inch range. So there is a huge market for smaller tablets, and all the other manufacturers are producing smaller ones in major volumes. So it makes sense for Apple to want to play more aggressively at that size. But I do have to wonder when it comes to the pricing, whether that's sort of pushing it a little too much.
It's a good point. Especially compared to something like the Nexus 7, which is also legitimately a nice tablet. It doesn't cut too many corners for that price, and this is a lot more expensive. I also wonder to what extent Apple can get away with it, just because these are the only iOS tablets you're going to find. So you can get this, or you can get
No,
the
it's-
iPad Mini from last year, which is okay, but which we didn't love quite as much.
Yeah.
Sure.
But their share of the tablet market is shrinking. I know part of it is that the flood of $100 or under $200 at least Android tablets, especially in China, and I've seen people make the point that at $100, a tablet is almost a different device than an iPad, or even a $300 Nexus 7, because I mean the limitations of what the device can do, or at least the quality of the experience is going to be markedly different, markedly worse. So I think that the market is segmenting in some really interesting ways. But I do think that the challenge for Apple is that, and it's one reason why they kept the old iPad mini at a $299 price point, is that, I mean, clearly there's a lot of price sensitivity for consumers, and I think there's a perception that when you're a 7 or 8 inch tablet that it should be priced cheaper. And I don't think Apple wants that, but I think the fact that Amazon was pricing the Kindle Fire so aggressively, and Google pricing the original Nexus 7 so aggressively. And even though the new one, the next generation Nexus 7 has a bump up in price, it wasn't quite as dramatic.
Sure, but I guess you could see, if you're sort of wavering between the Nexus 7 and last year's iPad mini, and the price difference is, $80 or thereabouts, you could see people picking up last year's iPad mini.
Yeah, well, I think especially in the U.S., there's a lot of comfort with Apple as a brand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously people have a growing acceptance of Android in the U.S., but there's still that sort of comfort with Apple as a brand, and I think a lot of people making those purchasing decisions based on that, and especially I mean in the Nexus 7 I think is selling pretty well, but there's still a lot of unfamiliarity with the general public with Asus as a manufacturer.
Sure, I mean, and you're right, there still is a lot of what was it that Tim Cook said, that they have hundreds of thousands of apps for the tablets and none of them are stretched out. I think the idea of sort of the Android tablet experience as somehow an inferior one, I think, is one that does persist. It's certainly gotten much better, and it's less of an issue on a 7-inch tablet than on a larger one. But I do think that is one of those things that, whether it's valid or not, is something that persists in a lot of people's minds, that you're not going to get the same kind of experience from an Android tablet as from an iOS model.
Is there even really much of a market for, say, 10-inch Android tablets? I mean,
I don't think so. I mean,
you hardly ever see people. I mean, I know there's like there's
things
larger,
like
the Note 10.1.
Yeah.
But you don't really see. I mean, it's not like a big market compared with the.
No. It's all dominated. I mean, even Amazon makes the larger versions of the Kindle Fire, but I do think that most of the market is in the 7-inch models.
Even Google has been a little bit slow to refresh the Nexus 10, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, we're probably due for a refresh, I don't know what, any week now.
Do you think that we'll see it at the same time as the Nexus 5, or do you think it's...
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, Google's done that before, right? Sort of lump them together into one announcement. I'm surprised I haven't heard more about the Nexus 10, actually, than I have by now.
No, you're right. It hasn't been something.
Well, the original one didn't sell very well.
No.
Because apart from having like great resolution,
it wasn't as nice of a product.
It wasn't
somehow.
that great of a product.
It didn't perform as fast as you would think, and I remember the battery life, as I recall, was only so-so for that.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a little bit of an afterthought for them, and I think part of it was that I think that they knew that with the Nexus 7 they had a hit on their hands, or a potential hit on their hands, and so I think that I think that they also realized that, just given the way that the tablet market was shaping up, that 7-inch size, it was still sort of that part of the market was still up for grabs.
Yeah.
And that because I do believe the Nexus 7 was released before the iPad Mini by a few months.
I believe so.
So it was it was a time where that part of the market was still up for grabs, and I think that even though the resolution on the Nexus 10 was higher than on the iPad, I mean, it still is on the regular iPad. I think that it just wasn't, in terms of build quality, in terms of battery life, in terms of, I mean, just in the fact that the differentiation of or the amount of optimized apps, Android apps for the 10-inch form factor. I mean, there's still really not many.
That still is an issue. Yeah. So speaking of 10-inch tablets, the iPad Air, any?
I was a little surprised at how lightweight it turned out to be. I don't know if I was expecting necessarily a tablet that came in at 1 pound flat. I mean, I was sort of prepared for the idea of a thinner and lighter tablet, just because advances in display technology mean that there's less overhead to power a display that bright. But what was it? It was something like 0.4 of a pound lighter. I mean, that's pretty big jump,
Yeah,
right?
for
From
something
one
that
generation
size,
to
yeah.
another.
4 pounds to
Yeah.
1 pound. Yeah, that's a. I mean,
That's a noticeable difference when you're holding it in your lap or whatever.
yeah, but also, I think we all kind of had this feeling that maybe they were, I don't want to say like writing off the 10-inch form or the 9.7-inch form factor, but that they'd kind of, I mean, because that's after the iPad Mini came out, like all of the usual suspects in the Apple blogosphere kind of tailed it as like, well, this is the real iPad.
Yeah.
This is the real deal. This is the one that's
Yeah.
that like the other one is kind of the the one we shouldn't care about anymore. and now it's kind of funny to see some of those same people sort of
Now coming back to the larger model.
well, yeah, saying sort of like, well, it's so light that I'm torn now. And I think that's actually one of the, I mean, obviously having it be so light makes it more compelling, but it is, I think that if your, options are a Retina iPad Mini or an iPad Air, it's almost like the overlap, I mean, they're not,
Yeah.
I mean, they're not, I mean, they're starting to become very similar products in a way.
They are. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And it's almost, you kind of wonder, like, from a product positioning standpoint, like, how do you really, how do you market those in a distinct, in such a distinct way? Because you
Yeah.
can't really, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just not sure, like, what, how do you...
It's hard to put personal preference into ads, isn't it? Say, it's hard for Apple to run a marketing campaign saying, whatever.
I mean, I
whatever's
think
cool
for
with
certain
you.
applications, I mean,
Yeah.
video is always going to be better on a larger screen, and I take a train here and I see people, with tablets on the train watching movies, and I think, a 10-inch tablet is definitely a better experience. And
I
if
agree.
it's
Apple's going
lighter-
to have a hard time marketing that. I suppose for the first iPad Mini, the marketing campaign, I think it just showed that everything you could do on the iPad, you could do on the iPad Mini, which makes sense for Apple, I guess. But to Peter's point, that doesn't really explain how they're different or why you would want one over the other. And maybe they're not going to come out and say, well, you want the bigger one for video
Yeah.
and the smaller one for books. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, they solved this problem, right, with the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air, right?
Yeah.
Like, they sort of said, okay, one is for business and one is just when you want the lightest, most portable, and don't, you're
Yeah,
sacrificing some of that power. And that's why, I mean, the Retina, that's why the Retina displays have not come to the Airs yet, because they're not it would actually confuse the messaging, because we would have, if let's say that like the 13-inch MacBook Pro didn't have a Retina display, but the 13-inch MacBook Air did, it would sort of, from a marketing standpoint, it'd be very difficult to position the Pro as the Pro
Sure,
at that point,
sure.
because you would actually get a higher quality experience and
Right.
on the Air, even if it wasn't had less horsepower.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how well these sell, and especially in the case of the Mini, how supplies are. I think they sort of downplayed that, but
right, as it is, they're releasing it a little bit later than
Exactly.
the Air.
yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if they are able to keep up with demand during the holiday season.
Yeah, because the Air starts or I guess you can order it on November 1st, and then is it?
I think it just ships November 1st, yeah.
But can you pre-order it now, or is it? Or they're taking orders on the 1st?
Because
I know they're not taking orders for the.
I know the tech
Mini.
news cycle. I feel like if it were up for pre-order, I would have read a million articles about how the site crashed or something, and I haven't read that yet, so I could be wrong. But yeah.
Well,
And so the other thing is no gold iPad Mini. That was the one thing that everyone seemed to think they were going to do. But I'm convinced that they're going to, because they're going to be so supply constrained that they're going to have no problem selling as many of these Retina
as many
iPad
as they
Minis
can
they
make.
And so I guarantee, like,
we'll see a gold one early next
early
year.
Q2 or something like that. Like, we're going to see a gold.
Oh.
They'll do a gold iPad Mini, and everyone will, go nuts.
Well,
And
I
they'll
guess
be,
now they've seen how the power of gold, they're not going to be able to turn back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mean, it's sort of an acknowledgement of just how that as much as Apple purports not to do market research and things like that, I mean, they clearly do try to gauge consumer sentiment around things like that.
Yeah.
The thing I can't figure out is why it's called space gray. Has anyone talked about Why space in that part of the name?
That's a good question.
Because I would just call it
anything about
I mean,
that.
if they just called it gray, I don't think anybody would really care.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think that probably is one of those things that market research plays into.
Well, because the thing is, like, it's not like space gray was like a color that like it's not like I went to like.
No, you're not going to go to Home Depot and get space gray paint.
Well, now you will.
Yeah, now you will.
Now it's space. Now that's expensive.
So you don't mind marketing names for colors. You just want them to make sense.
Well, you know what it is? It's like, yeah, I don't really care that much. What I'm curious is like the rationale behind it, because Apple. I mean, if you look back at like Apple's sort of naming conventions or whatever, it's very rare that they come up with a. I mean, not saying they've never done it, but usually they just have like a single color name that's not something. Like space gray was not, and maybe this is something like this is actually like a gray that I've just never heard of before.
as a legitimate color.
Yeah,
it's
but that's what I'm trying
to palette.
Is like gray something that they made up, or it was like space gray, some like NASA thing.
Yeah.
That I just never heard of.
I don't know.
No one has written about this.
Somebody answer that in the comments, please. Somebody's got to know.
Honestly, I think if there's one thing Engadget should be focusing on is figuring that mystery out.
I think so. Yeah.
Because that's
hopefully, let's put our commenters on that. Okay. Somebody's got to figure it out.
Because I'm genuine. I actually am genuinely curious, because it's. I mean, it'd be like if they called it like, some other. I mean, they didn't have like they just have it's like
robot gray.
It's space gray. Yeah, exactly. Like space gray, and there's battleship gray, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's not like people don't have shades of gray, but it's like not like they had like they called it like something like I don't know, Curly's gold or something like that.
No, I'm sure they had a reason.
I don't know if anybody caught the reference there.
Yeah. So other Apple news, making some of their core apps free. Everybody said, well, that's going to be a blow to Microsoft, or Microsoft's not going to really care, or it's going to be a huge win for them in terms of building a customer base. Any thoughts about sort of that strategy?
I don't think it's really a blow to Microsoft. I sort of cringe when people bring Microsoft into it, as if it has any real implications for Microsoft. I think people are using Word, if not Word on the desktop. I think they're using cloud services like Google Docs, let's say. Maybe even Microsoft's own cloud services. But
sure.
I don't know how much share the iWork suite had to begin with, and I don't know if this will necessarily improve it.
Yeah, no, I can't see anybody rushing out to buy a new Mac instead of a Windows machine because they can get this suite for free. And you're right. I mean, you can use cloud-based suites for free already. Google Docs. There are plenty of free desktop alternatives to Microsoft Office that do pretty much everything Office does. And Office's big revenue is still in the enterprise. And I don't see corporate purchasing managers switching to Macs because they can get Apple's Office suite for free.
Yeah, I mean, if you bought enough Macs, they'd probably give it for free.
They would have already.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting move. I think it's not. I mean, it's not unprecedented for Apple to wage a little bit of psychological warfare. And if they weren't selling that many that much in the first place, and there's no marginal cost for them, right? They've already built it, so it doesn't really cost them anything to give it away at this point. Yeah, I mean, I did think it was interesting to see a lot of people fixating on Mavericks being given away, and how this was somehow like a master stroke against Microsoft.
Because here's Windows 8.1, and you have to pay if you're getting it as
if you have Windows 7.
Right. If you're upgrading from Windows 8, it's free.
Yeah, but it's a free upgrade from Windows 8. So
right, exactly. So how is that any different?
Mavericks is free only in that like you've already had to have bought. Like if they were like, here's Mavericks and put it on any computer you want, like that would be a crazy thing, right?
Right.
But they're not doing that.
No.
So it's
a free upgrade.
It's a free upgrade. It's as free as iOS 7.
Right, I mean, but the hardware is hardly free ever.
Exactly. So I don't really see it as that. I mean, I think that there's great PR around it, and certainly, again, Apple is really good at getting that story out there. But again, I mean, I don't see it as big of a thing, and I can certainly understand why Microsoft would not just give away 8.1 for people that didn't already own.
Didn't already have 8. Yeah.
There's a reason, because that's. But it's not like if Apple were to go to Lenovo and give away Mavericks or something or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're never going to do that, but that would be a problem.
Let anybody build a Hackintosh.
Also,
with
people
it.
who talk about this as a blow against Microsoft, they're sort of acting as if Mavericks itself is a really big upgrade. I mean, we wrote a detailed review, but basically the short version is it's kind of a modest, not that exciting upgrade. It brings some nice features, but it's not a huge upgrade. It's not a very exciting one. If they charge money for it, maybe our verdict in the review would have been even a little bit less positive.
Yeah.
The fact that it's free, though, kind of made our review like, well, why wouldn't you download it?
Sure.
But no, it's not a big upgrade. Why would they charge for it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was smart of them to try to get some of the last remaining holdouts from Snow Leopard or whatever to upgrade, and it certainly gives them an incentive to do it.
Sure.
Though I would argue that there are probably people that just don't realize that.
No, plenty of people don't care
Because I
or
think if
don't
you
think
don't
about
have,
it.
if you're on Snow Leopard, I don't think you have the App Store, which then you have nothing nagging you to like upgrade your machine. I think someone will fact check me on that, but I'm trying to remember what version of.
Right, the last version that didn't have the App Store.
Yeah, the
built
last
in.
version that didn't have the App Store. So, I think that from Apple, in terms of like the platform they're trying to build and the ecosystem, blah blah blah, I think it makes sense to try to get everyone in the latest version.
Yeah, wanting everyone on the same page. Same's probably true of Microsoft, honestly.
Yeah.
No, it's to their advantage to get everyone on 8.1 at this point.
Yeah, which is I think why it sort of, the fact that they had to sort of Osborne so many of their, Windows Phone 7 devices.
Yeah.
Or maybe Osborne is not quite the right term, but obsolesce.
Yeah.
I guess. That was hurt so bad because that was one of the supposed to be the great things about Windows Phone was like the ability to have
and then
this
all of a sudden
unified upgrade path.
Right, and all of a sudden you were stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of Microsoft, and
Yeah.
obviously everybody was talking about the new iPads this week, but meanwhile, Microsoft launched the new Surfaces. Obviously, they launched them a few weeks ago in terms of making the announcement, but they hit retail this week, and we actually had reviews of them. And Dana, you wrote those reviews, so any thoughts on
and
the new
Microsoft
Surfaces?
wins, by the way, because I was so mentally drained after writing both of these reviews in a short period of time that I woke up on Tuesday not particularly caring about what Apple had to say. I ended up caring and ended up being interested, but Microsoft won my brain space anyway.
Okay.
No, I'll start with the Surface 2. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I mean, when it was first launched, I sort of said, how does this really improve Microsoft's chances? And I don't know if this is going to reverse Microsoft's fortunes. For all we know, they're going to book another big inventory loss on this too. But RT, it had many more apps for me this time than it did a year ago. And the battery life on this thing was just so long that it made me forgive the fact that it's RT a little bit. The final battery life in our final test was 14 hours and 22 minutes, well
That's
above
great.
the,
That's
well above
pretty-
the conservative estimate of
Yeah.
10 hours that Microsoft is giving. And when battery life is that long, you get to the point where you think, well, maybe if this did have an Intel Bay Trail processor inside, maybe a battery life wouldn't be this long, and maybe this is one reason why you would go for RT and an ARM processor. That said, it would still be nice to have full apps on there. And I know people aren't expecting something like OS 10 on an iPad, let's say, but iPad has unfailingly pretty much every app you would want.
Yeah.
And Surface, the Windows Store doesn't. And it's also an app it's not an app, it's also a device that's supposed to make you more productive, or that you can be more productive with than an iPad. And I don't even want to install, let's say, Photoshop on a Bay Trail tablet, but we use HipChat and Engadget to talk to each other all day long.
Yep.
That is a lightweight app that I cannot currently install on the Surface 2, but that I would need the Surface Pro 2 for, which is a little overkill maybe for some people. So yeah, there's tons of lightweight apps, whether it's, I don't know, image resizers, lightweight photo editors, IM clients that you can't currently install on the Surface 2, but that you would easily be able to run, and run pretty smoothly, I think, on a Bay Trail processor.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are iOS and Android versions of most of those programs. HipChat has them, and there's no reason there couldn't be a version for RT for
Yeah, and even if it weren't in the Windows Store, at least if I could download the x86 version, it would kind of compensate for the fact that I couldn't get it in sort of the new Metro or modern version.
Right, and of course you obviously can do that on the Surface Pro and can do that on any number of full Windows
Surface
tablets.
Pro 2 is 2 pounds. It's a lot heavier, and it's more than twice the price. So or it's about twice the price.
Well, what did you think of the Surface Pro? You did the review this week, and
so basically it's supposed to play the role of both a laptop and a tablet, and it never filled both roles perfectly, and it still doesn't fill both roles perfectly. But I'm going to try to avoid talking with my hands here to not confuse people listening at home. But it got a lot better as a laptop because it's more comfortable to use on your legs, and it's about as fast as an Ultrabook now. The battery life is on par with an Ultrabook. It didn't make as much progress as a tablet. It's as heavy. The dimensions really are the same exact as they were last year. It's exactly as heavy as it was last year. So it would be nice for the Surface Pro 3, whenever that comes out next year, if it were, thinner and lighter and a little bit more tablet-like, in addition to being as fast as a laptop.
Yeah. I mean, Peter, you've used, I don't know if you've used tried the new ones yet, but I know you tried the first-gen ones.
Yeah, I spent some time with the original the Surface RT, which is now just called Surface.
Yeah,
Do you see
yeah,
that?
they've dropped the RT.
They're very savvy. That's probably a year too late.
Commenters on the Surface review were getting a little bit annoyed at me for suggesting that the fact that Surface 2 doesn't even have RT in the name, that suggests that maybe Microsoft wanted to distance itself from the original Surface. They got very annoyed at me for saying that. But what else would you conclude from that?
It's because, having RT appended to it just created a lot of confusion, and I don't think it helped. I don't think it helped anyone really understand what made it different or better or worth buying versus something else.
I think with the whole RT concept, Microsoft has sort of painted themselves into a corner because whether it's in the product name or not, it still is a sort of, hobbled version of Windows that they don't want to call a hobbled version of Windows. And every time they refer to it as a Windows tablet of any kind, people are going to assume, well, I can install HipChat, I can install Photoshop, I can install AIM, etc., etc. I can install Chrome, and you can't, obviously. And the new one, they've added Outlook. They've tried to make it a more capable, computer for people who are looking to do real productivity-based work on it. But in the end, it's not Windows, and no matter what they do to distance themselves from the RT branding, I think, if anything, potentially it becomes even more confusing.
Yeah, I know that there's some plan eventually to unify Windows Phone and RT in some way, and I know that they obviously want to have one set of APIs, so you can build apps for across all the platforms. But I know I've probably said this a million times on the podcast, but I really think that they should have built up from Windows Phone, or this should be, if they Surface, they could have a Surface Pro and even make it a little bigger, make it a slightly even like a larger device, and then have a slightly smaller one that's runs on like a blown up version of Windows Phone, and you could build off of that ecosystem. So
the iOS model.
More like the iOS model, and I think that there's I think you'd have less confusion. I think that you would have, I'm not saying it solves their problems, because obviously Windows Phone still has its challenges, but at least you have a clear mobile focused ecosystem to build on top of. And I think that what happened was they basically made a decision. We're going to have they based their decision on this idea that they had to have an ARM-based version of Windows, and that put them in, like I said, it put them in a really bad place, product-wise. And I don't think that I think that until they figure out how to unify Windows RT and Windows Phone, and I'm just saying, they're going to still. They're just like, it's almost like creating like a third platform. And I know that technically, the Metro apps.
No, technically the Metro apps are
across Windows 8 and Windows RT, but it's still what you end up with this weird. It's like you have like an ecosystem, and then you have like a sub ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I've never seen that really work very effectively. I mean, it's just like how, and this is one of the things that Android has really overcome is like, you could imagine if imagine if like Android really was so fragmented that, it was sort of a crapshoot, like which apps would actually run on your phone. Like for the most part, like you don't worry about it. Like an app comes out and like, I mean, I know it's a pain in the ass for app developers, but like, for the average person, like they don't worry that like when Instagram for Android was released that it, in fact, it actually didn't work on my phone, but
but if you have a relatively recent phone,
you usually don't worry about it. But I think that there's a sort of, and again, I know that like the Metro apps are consistent across both, but I think that like it's not an intuitive distinction for the average person,
I
like
agree.
What works on regular Windows and what will be RT.
I agree, and if you look at sort of uptake of Windows 8, it's extremely slow. Businesses and major institutions are still primarily on Windows 7. A lot of them are still on XP, and that's normal for an upgrade cycle. But I think this sort of fragmentation certainly isn't helping Microsoft.
Yeah. No, it's very tough, and I think they made a big bet with the design of Windows 8, and I think that it was a bet that was probably worth taking, even though it hasn't worked out to quite the extent that they would have liked. But I mean, I just feel like that there's a reason why ARM-based devices run mobile OSs.
Right.
Right, they're really optimized for not just in terms of the power efficiencies of the processor, but they're really, it seems like consumers for a touch-based device really prefer a certain kind of experience.
Yeah. Well, we'll see where Microsoft is able to go with this. Before we touch on anything else, wanted to mention once more that this episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial, go to squarespace.com and use offer code Engadget. So we're talking about Windows 8 and Windows RT, and obviously there's one other big player that's involved in that marketplace, Windows Phone, Windows RT, and it's a company that will soon be part of Microsoft. But at this point, they are technically the only company other than Microsoft making a Windows RT tablet, and that would be Nokia. They had what, at this point, maybe their last big launch as an independent company. They launched their new Lumia tablet, the other Windows RT tablet in the market, as well as some new Lumia phones. And Dana, I'm not sure if you had a chance to sort of take a look at those and sort of...
Yeah, I've read up on them. I was not out in Abu Dhabi when the announcement was made, so I have not gotten hands-on. We'll be doing reviews of both that and the 1520, the giant phone they announced, probably in the coming weeks. What can I say? I mean, Nokia makes really great hardware. It looks like a well-designed tablet. I'm not sure if it skirts the issues with RT any more than the Surface 2 does. Now that I've tested the battery life on the Surface 2, I'm curious to see if that's just sort of a thing with RT. I'm curious though. I mean, more, not just about this product itself, but to me it seems to be a harbinger of the kinds of designs we might expect from Microsoft once Nokia's device people are in-house. So that's the most interesting angle to me, is just to see where they're starting with their first Windows tablet and what that might say about designs going forward.
Yeah, I wonder whether they'll have, I mean, not that it's the end of the world, right, for them to have Nokia as a brand and then Surface as a brand making stuff. I mean, certainly Google manages to do things that are far less intuitive, right, with Motorola and then its Nexus line. So it's not that I would fault them in any way, but you do have to wonder whether there is, from just in terms of like resources standpoint, whether it makes sense to have a Surface 2 and a Nokia 2520 in the market, because there are obviously differences, but I mean they're both kind of premium nice devices, and I think that I think they're priced. Are they priced the same even?
The 2520 is going to be $499.
All right, a little more expensive than the
Yeah.
Surface 2.
So, because what's the Surface 2 starting at? It's
$449.
$449. So it's a little more expensive, but it's like basically they're very similar. But I guess I'm saying from like it's like I think that like the bigger challenges is getting people to consider an RT tablet
Sure.
rather than like
Right.
getting them to like it's like when HTC and Nokia were kind of fighting over like who had more Windows Phone share. And
Right.
It's like,
Just get people to buy
it's
Windows
not,
Phone.
Yeah, like let's you're haggling over a worthless crown.
So do you think Microsoft, after the acquisition is closed, will likely, continue to have the Nokia-based tablets, or gradually phase those out?
I don't know. I mean, it is. I don't think they've really given any sense of what happens with the Surface stuff versus the Lumia stuff. I don't know. Dana, have you heard anything about this at all? Is there any indication from them, like what happens?
They've been sort of coy on the subject of what's going to happen to those devices.
Yeah.
And the branding. I mean,
Because Surface is a great brand. I mean, it's a great brand.
No, I mean, they had it obviously for another product, and they liked the
Yeah.
name so much that they took it for this. So yeah, it is a great brand.
yeah, not sure what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess nobody is at this point. But Nokia, obviously, they rolled out a bunch of products this week, not just the Surface tablet, but as you said, a new sort of phablet type phone, and that's the last time you'll hear me use that word. But as well as some sort of lower end phones, their Asha series for the developing world, and there's been a lot of questions about sort of where Microsoft will go with that, whether because these don't run on Windows Phone, they're the kinds of things Microsoft even has any interest in. And Nokia is continuing to roll them out and continuing to build market share in developing markets. With the Asha series as sort of lower end proprietary smartphones that potentially can build a market in the developing world. And a lot of people think Microsoft will continue doing that. That even though it's not Windows Phone, it gives them a foothold in markets that will continue to grow. And as consumers there continue to sort of have more purchasing power and want their next phone, they can then market Windows phones to them.
Yeah.
Then again, I don't really see the problem with making low-end Windows phones. We've actually seen some budget Windows phones, and I think the world could
Yeah.
use some more of them. But the Windows Phone software doesn't require much overhead, so I think in theory you could build a pretty low-end, cheaply made device that would still run Windows Phone pretty well and do it justice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a prepaid. There's somebody selling a prepaid Windows Phone here in the U.S. I'm trying to remember. Is it the 521 or 520?
Yeah, but that is a good point. There are some much lower end Windows phones,
Yeah.
including Nokia models. So
I'm trying to remember how much it sells for. But somebody I feel like was selling like a cheap Windows Phone without contract for a prepaid. But maybe someone in the chat knows. But my theory before Microsoft bought Nokia, and I think we all kind of had our speculation that was something that would happen sooner at some point. I'd always assumed that they would just buy the smartphone business, right? They would just buy basically the Lumia business, and they would find somebody. They would kind of jettison the other part of the handset business to somebody else, and you could see some other manufacturer, maybe in China or something like that, kind of picking that up. It may be that Microsoft decided that it was not really worth it, that even though they had to pay for it, and maybe that they would end up shutting it down at some point, that it was better that was better than to let somebody else use it, take it and kind of use it as the core of their business.
Right. That
So-
if this way, at least if they can shut it down, but if it were spun off and some other company bought it,
if like Huawei took it or something like
Right,
that, then that would be that would net out as like a bad thing.
Sure, and I think
for them.
Microsoft paid less for Nokia than it did for Skype, so it's not like they couldn't afford this.
I know I mean, they just had all that cash overseas that they're not going to bring back to the U.S. So it made sense to do something with it. But it'll be interesting to see how long they keep around stuff that's not on running their software, right? I mean, it's a little bit about how, like, reminds me of how when they bought Danger, right, which ended up being a huge
With the kin phones?
What?
With the kin phones?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
right there it was like, hey, let's buy this low-end
Yeah.
handset maker, and we're going to move everything over to our servers, which caused a huge data outage for, I mean, I don't know if people remember, like when Sidekick data went out for like days and days and days, and basically killed the brand.
Yep.
And which I think T-Mobile actually owned the brand Sidekick.
Yeah, I believe so.
And it completely killed the brand for T-Mobile. Like they stopped using it.
Yeah. And then when it came to sort of texting, that brand was golden for years.
I mean, you could easily see them, repurposing it for a low-end Android handset or something. Which I think there was that one Motorola Sidekick that ran on Android. I think. God, I gotta remember this stuff. But not that was a great device. But my point is that, like, I don't really see them, coming up with like another kin type fiasco where they do like Asha is some like super stripped down Windows phone.
No, I don't see
OS.
that.
But there was a Sidekick that ran Android.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess the alternative is to like shut it down.
Yeah, but I mean, there is a huge market in the developing world for smartphones, and you've got companies like Xiaomi that are growing by leaps and bounds by focusing on that. And it could be an opportunity for Microsoft to build a market in countries where it doesn't have a footprint like that now.
Yeah, that's gonna be tough. I'm sure they must be scared to death by Xiaomi.
Yeah,
so, as well they should be.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, any other news this week that struck either of you as intriguing? That we've got a couple more minutes before we wrap.
Do we want to take any questions from the?
Yeah, we can take questions
sure.
from the chat room if anybody's got any that we would like to answer. While we're waiting for questions, I'll say that my sort of story of the week that I thought was intriguing is the idea that former Apple CEO Scully is considering potentially being part of a team to buy BlackBerry.
Man, how about
I
that?
hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I just find that a little ironic. The guy who sort of is known historically as sort of leading Apple's decline is interested in somehow being a savior and rescuing a company that is in decline in a big way. I don't see it happening, but it certainly is an interesting story.
Man, that would be pretty interesting. And I guess there was rumors that Lenovo was kicking the tires on BlackBerry.
Yeah. And there are, I guess, a lot of people poking around. I'm sure somebody will find some value there.
If only for the patents, right?
I think that's probably what's worth the most there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like the way, if you want to deliver the most value for shareholders, would be to split the company up and sell the pieces that people want, which I guess is sort of increasingly likely.
Yeah. No, I think so.
Man, as a former BlackBerry user.
I had a I forget which model it was. I had one of the earlier sort of when they were the big, heavy, chunky ones. I had one of the first ones with a color display, and I liked it. I got so used to that keyboard; it was great.
I had the first one or the second one, like the one that ran on the pager network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that like it was like this big. And
I remember those.
And I remember like I set it up with my email from work. It's like 1999, and I remember it was like a Saturday night. I was like, I can check work email, And all these people were like, why would you do that?
That was the one with didn't even have a phone. It was just the two-way
pager.
pager.
It was just it ran on the pager network.
Those, yeah.
It was amazing. I wish I could find it. So we had. Did we get? I think we got
any
one questions. Where do you see the tablet market going from here? Did we kind of talk about that already?
I think so. Yeah.
The tablet market. I think it's going to be lots and lots of cheap Android tablets forever.
Yeah. No, I mean, Apple's market share is half what it was a year ago, and I think it's inevitable that that's going to continue to slide. And I think that that's what happened with the iPhone, and when you've got so many competitors and so many of them are willing to cut costs and cut corners, and you've got a company like Amazon that would is willing to sort of make it up on content. it's pretty hard to compete, and clearly the pricing of the Retina iPad Mini shows that Apple isn't interested in competing on price.
Yeah. I mean, I think like there's one company I really don't worry about is Apple. Right? It's like they're still going to sell tons of stuff. They're still going to make tons of money. I don't really worry about them. I do think that the market in tablets is growing at a tremendously fast pace, and I think that the price of tablets means that people can afford to buy more than one. I mean, it's a little bit like when sales of PCs really took off, when they got cheap enough that you could afford, like a family could afford to own more than one. And that was maybe about 10 years, 12 years ago. And tablets got there really quickly. But they're a place where it's like, you can buy, conceivably, I mean, if a tablet's $100 or $200, you can conceivably have, like, every family member can own one.
That's true.
It's not like, I'm not going to minimize the idea that you would spend like $1,000 on tablets for your family or something like that altogether. But I mean, it's not like out of reach the way that, like, if you wanted to buy, like, if you go back 15 years and you wanted to buy every family member a PC, like you'd be out like what, like $8.
Yeah. But I mean, it's true.
$8,000.
You can. I mean, people are buying $150 tablets for 5-year-olds. And they're not going to buy a 5-year-old, an iPad Mini with Retina, but they might buy it for themselves. Mom and Dad might buy those and get the kid.
That's where the market, you
can
can see it's like, it's not like as much of a zero-sum game, at least right now. Like, it's this sort of the pie is growing, and I think that people are going to buy multiple ones. I don't think they're going to buy RT tablets, but but I think that it's conceivable that people are going to buy.
Right,
well, I know in both Android and
iOS.
I mean, that's what I have. I have multiple iPads and multiple Android tablets at home. So
they serve different needs. Yeah.
All right, so we got one more question.
Let's see. One reader pointed out that John Scully made some good products, and he made the Newton. And regardless of what you think of the Newton, it did pioneer a category. I think he coined the term PDA.
That was him?
I think so. Yeah, the first Apple laptops came out under Scully. So. He actually increased their revenue dramatically before he started leading the company into decline, so it wasn't all bad.
Yeah.
His legacy, though, is pretty tainted, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to remember him as a brilliant businessman.
People
He's no Jack Welch. He's no Steve Jobs.
No, and people remember him as the guy who ousted Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
That's his legacy, and Steve Jobs obviously coming back and rescuing the company.
Well, if we could be a footnote in some other famous person's biography, that's not so bad.
Yeah. True.
Okay, so one more question. When will Xiaomi be available outside of imports and retail stores in the US and Europe, and why is it not yet? I don't think we know.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're focusing on developing markets where...
Be a good question for Richard Lai if he were here.
Yeah.
Editor-in-chief of Engadget Chinese and also senior editor for Main Engadget.
I mean, I know that I certainly would consider buying one of their phones, and I know people that have imported them, but I think it's a good question. I think it's one of those things where the U.S. market is very complicated to get into. I mean, even
you have to have carrier relationships.
Yeah, it tends to be most phones tend to get sold through carriers, and it's not that. I mean, there are budget Chinese OEMs that do sell in the U.S. Like Blue sells on Amazon for their handsets, and those are very cheap. There's no reason Xiaomi, or Meizu, or any of these guys couldn't do that.
Sure.
I'm just not sure they think it's worth the trouble.
I mean, the Chinese market is huge.
Yeah.
So
it's still growing.
Yeah, it's not like they're not making money at home.
They sold 100,000 phones in 90 seconds, so it's not like they need to go out of the way. But I do wonder if if there's a point at which they do decide that it becomes. I mean, like Huawei and ZTE, they made like a concerted effort to get into the U.S. market and work with the carriers. But even like a big company like Lenovo, which has plenty of presence here and has the business here selling PCs, like they don't really sell phones here at all.
No, they don't.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone in the U.S. with a Lenovo phone.
I don't think so. No, it is a tough market to crack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I feel like they're coming. Like I feel like
if anyone does, it's going to be them.
Well, I mean, you could see them you could see Xiaomi, like a company like Xiaomi, which is very design focused and creates like really nice phones for a pretty competitive price. I mean, you could see them really hurting HTC, some of the smaller HTC, really hurting Motorola. like hurting some of the smaller, like the sort of the second tier OEMs.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
they're not
makes a
going to
lot
hurt
of sense.
Samsung really, but they're going to hurt, you know, some of these smaller guys who are still trying to,
Yeah.
you know, get back on their feet.
Yeah, no, that's something HTC could not afford at this point.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe HTC is blackmailing them to keep them out of the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And then is next week's show going to be in costume?
In costume? Oh, that's right. It's going to be Halloween next week. Ooh. Well,
I-
I will. Is Brian back next week?
Yeah,
Brian can wear a costume. So.
Guys, if you've been watching, you know that I did a podcast a couple months ago in a beard that's strapped around my face. So I only do these things every once in a while. That was like my early Halloween.
Well, if you want costumes next week, put them in the comments, and you know, we'll see. If Brian's back, then maybe we'll make him put on a costume. So, okay.
I will not be in costume.
Okay. I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, I don't know if we have much more to go over this
no,
week.
it was a big week, and I think we've
Yeah.
covered a lot of it. So, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks.
Thanks.